Hello, everyone. You are listening to the Quick History Lesson podcast. Before we begin, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who tuned in to our very first episode. We hope you all continue to tune in and show support. As you know, we are doing this on YouTube, but are also available on other platforms. We hope you press that like and subscribe button and continue to tune in as we keep doing what we love, which is talking history. Today's episode is about the Montgomery Bus Boycott. The Montgomery Bus Boycott and its success helped pave the way for the dismantling of Jim Crow, changing the entire landscape of the United States. The persistent resentment to the economic, social, and political gains of African Americans post-Civil War led to a century of apartheid in the United States known as Jim Crow. From education to restaurants, and in this case transportation, Jim Crow dominated every aspect of American life. By the 1920s, the legality of Jim Crow laws began to be challenged in courts. There was some momentum going into the 1930s, but President Roosevelt's reluctance kept that momentum at bay. In his defense, though, he did have some initiatives, like signing an executive order prohibiting discrimination in the federal workplace. While civil rights initiatives were already underway, for me, it was President Truman desegregating the military in 1948 that started that momentum for the civil rights movement. Brown versus Board, Emmett Till, and the Montgomery Bus Boycott were the events that elevated that. But that's for a future episode. Now, with Rosa Parks. There's a preconceived notion that she was some random old woman who refused to give up her seat because she was tired. She was 42 when she got arrested and had been around activism since the 1930s. When Rosa Parks began seeing her husband Raymond Parks in 1931, he was in the NAACP aiding the organization with freeing the Scottsboro Boys. In 1943, Rosa Parks became the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP's secretary. Rosa Parks was a fierce women's activist and served as an investigator on behalf of black women who had been assaulted, like Miss Reese Taylor in 1944. In the summer of 1955, Rosa Parks attended the Highlander Folk School, which was a social justice training center in Tennessee, and was mentored by Septima Clark. For more perspective, this was around the time Emmett Till was kidnapped and killed in Mississippi. Till arrived in Mississippi a week before activist Lamar Smith was killed, and months before Reverend George Lee was also killed for his activism. Emmett Till's killers were acquitted just days before Rosa Parks' arrest. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks was sitting in the colored section of a Montgomery, Alabama bus when bus driver James F. Blake moved the colored section sign to demand that she and 3 others give up their seats so white passengers could sit. While the others complied, she did not. She was arrested and charged for violating segregation laws. With assistance from the NAACP's Edie Nixon and Clifford Durr, Parks received bail. Joanne Robinson, president of the Women's Political Council, or WPC, who had been verbally abused by a bus driver in the past, wanted to organize a boycott for years with little success. Along with the NAACP, they were looking for the right opportunity to challenge this. With persuasion and her permission, Rosa Parks gave them the opportunity they hoped for. It should be noted that while Rosa Parks was aware of the efforts to challenge Montgomery's segregation policies, she did not intentionally get on the bus with the intention of protesting. However, once the exchange occurred, she began thinking of Emmett Till and defiantly refused to give up her seat. She had encountered Blake in 1943 and vowed not to ride his bus again due to how he treated her. Had she been paying attention, she probably would have not gotten on that bus. I should also point out, and it's a little foreshadowing, that in June 1955, Blake got into another altercation with a black woman named Lucille Times after he tried to run her off the road with the bus. In protest, Times and her husband would go to bus stops and offer black passengers free rides for the next few months. During the Montgomery Bus Boycott, they continued to do this along with others, as boycotters either took black transportation services, walked, or carpooled. On December 5th, as Rosa Parks faced trial, thousands of leaflets about the boycott had already been distributed throughout the city by the WPC. Local black churches also spread the word. Using the Baton Rouge Bus Boycott in 1953 as a blueprint, approximately 40,000 black bus riders participated in the boycott. The boycott was intended to be for one day, but its success allowed it to continue on for about 381 days. The Montgomery Improvement Association was created as a result, with a young emerging minister named Martin Luther King Jr. leading the boycott as the MIA's president. The initial demands didn't call for changing segregation laws, but instead courtesy and the hiring of black bus drivers. Rosa Parks also helped with organizing boycotts and protests, and in February 1956 was arrested along with others for violating the law that banned organized boycotting. While the Montgomery Bus Boycott occurred, the Browder v. Gayle Supreme Court case was challenging the legality of Montgomery's busing ordinance. African Americans represented more than half of Montgomery's busing ridership, yet the city refused to compromise with the boycotters. Once the Supreme Court upheld Browder v. Gayle in December 1956, Montgomery's busing segregation ended, thus ending the boycott. Of course, the boycott was met with racial resentment. White supremacist groups like the White Citizens Council, which was formed as a result of Brown v. Board in opposition of diversity, equality, and inclusion, saw a drastic increase in membership due to the boycotts. Segregationists threatened, harassed, and attacked boycotters, even sniping them and bombing the homes of prominent figures like Martin Luther King Jr. Because of this violence, the busing service temporarily stopped, but it resumed once it died down. Now, at this time, we'd like to take a quick break. We've covered a lot and intend to cover some more. When we return, we'll dive into Browder v. Gayle. This is the Quick History Lesson Podcast. Welcome back to the Quick History Lesson Podcast. We hope you press that like and subscribe button and follow us on our other platforms. In that first segment, we covered the Montgomery Bus Boycott. Let's dive a little deeper, shall we? Now, challenges over segregated transportation go as far back as at least 1841, when Frederick Douglass was removed from a train for refusing to sit in a segregated section. In the 1860s, a woman named Charlotte Brown filed 2 successful lawsuits after she was removed from streetcars by the same company in San Francisco. Before she became an anti-lynching activist, Ida B. Wells was also forcibly removed from a train in Tennessee in 1884. The decision on Homer Plessy's lawsuit in Plessy v. Ferguson legitimized Jim Crow laws in 1896. In 1946, Morgan v. Virginia ruled segregated interstate travel unconstitutional, yet Southern companies continued their practices with no pushback. A week before Rosa Parks' arrest, a lawsuit involving PFC Sarah Keys ruled that the Interstate Commerce Act prohibited segregation altogether. In 1951, Lily Mae Bradford was arrested in Montgomery, Alabama for refusing to leave the white passenger section after she was charged the incorrect price on a ticket by the bus driver. These practices led to black protests throughout the South. 4 years later, 15-year-old Claudette Colvin was arrested in Montgomery for refusing to give up her seat to a white passenger. She and 3 classmates used the Montgomery city buses to return from school. When the bus driver asked them to give up their seats, all complied except for Colvin, who argued it was her constitutional right. I'd like to take this time to point out that Claudette Colvin was arrested 9 months prior to Rosa Parks for doing the same exact thing in the same exact city. Yet, until recently, most people didn't know about her story, and it was kinda intentional. You see, while civil rights leaders took Parks' case, they were cautious towards Colvin's, and there's a few reasons why. One was that the reaction to Colvin's arrest was mixed. Her classmates were unsurprised by her actions, and the civil rights organizers did not see her as a symbol they needed. Colvin was young and seen as immature, and she ended up pregnant before the year was out. The belief was the circumstances surrounding Claudette Colvin would bring negative attention to challenging busing segregation, whereas Rosa Parks would not. It should also be noted that the civil rights movement was heavily influenced by black churches, which tend to be socially conservative. Because of this, there tended to be a lot of conflicts during parts of the movement involving misogyny and homophobia, as well as petty beefs. But anyways, fearing Rosa Parks' case would be held up in local courts, Nixon and others reconsidered using Colvin's case in federal courts once the Montgomery Bus Boycott began. In the months in between the arrest of Claudette, Colvin, and Rosa Parks, 4 other women were either arrested or harassed for violating Montgomery's busing policy. While civil rights leaders didn't feel each case individually would give them the opportunity they needed, E.D. Nixon, along with Fred Gray and Clifford Durr, got Colvin, Browder, McDonald, and Smith to be plaintiffs in a lawsuit. A 5th woman, Janetta Reese, initially agreed to become a plaintiff, but withdrew her name following threats. The U.S. District Court filed the case against Montgomery's mayor, W.A. Gayle, in February 1956. By June, the District Court ruled that busing segregation violated the 14th Amendment and was therefore unconstitutional. The ruling was appealed to the United States Supreme Court, and in November 1956, the Supreme Court affirmed the District Court's ruling, calling for Alabama and Montgomery to implement busing desegregation. Alabama petitioned for a rehearing of the case, but it was denied. By December, the ruling was implemented. Now this has been our coverage of Browder v. Gayle and its role in the Montgomery Bus Boycott. We will stop right here and take a quick break. When we return, we will close out the Montgomery Bus Boycott. This is the Quick History Lesson Podcast.
Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate and of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Jones barbecue and foot massage. Jones barbecue and foot massage. Hey baby, I want that car. Hey baby,
Welcome to the final segment of the Quick History Lesson Podcast. If you've liked what you've heard so far, please don't forget to press that like and subscribe button, as well as check us out on our other platforms. Now, let's look at the overall picture of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. The Montgomery Bus Boycott overshadows Browder v. Gayle. And if you don't study much history or live near Alabama, you probably haven't heard of the case or any of the women involved in it. While the Montgomery Bus Boycott gave the civil rights movement its momentum, it was Browder v. Gayle that brought the boycott to its end, cementing its impact. The end of the Montgomery Bus Boycott established Martin Luther King Jr. as the face of the civil rights movement. Rosa Parks' legacy was also cemented. Yet, until recent memory, Colvin, Browder, McDonald, and Smith's stories were often untold. Not much is known about McDonald afterwards. Browder remained an activist. While Mary Louise Smith was not an activist, she did attend the March on Washington in 1963. Because of hardships after, both Rosa Parks and Claudette Colvin left Alabama. Rosa Parks eventually to Detroit, where she lived until her death in 2005, and Claudette Colvin to New York, before moving back to Alabama in 2004. In 2019, a statue was dedicated in honor of Rosa Parks, with markers near the statue honoring the women of the Browder lawsuit, with Mary Louise Smith in attendance. With that concludes our coverage of the Montgomery Bus Boycott. Before we end the show, we wanted to point some things out. Typically, when you see pictures of Rosa Parks, it's usually pictures of her sitting on a bus. Obviously, these are staged after the end of the boycott. The irony of it is that the bus these photos were staged on was assigned to James F. Blake. When we first made our TikTok account, our very first viral video was about Rosa Parks' birthday. Looking at it now, the video was pretty bad quality. But in our defense, QHL was still new to TikTok and we were still figuring things out. But the fact Rosa Parks died on October 24, 2005 stunned a lot of our younger audience. People pointing out that Rosa Parks either died right before or days after they were born, and the fact she may have watched Shrek hits me every time. But there are some other stories and connections involving Rosa Parks that may blow your mind. But that's for a TikTok, a YouTube short, or for another time. It's kind of cool to look at history through these perspectives, and whatever we can do to get our audience engaged in learning history, we will do whatever we can. A lot of these history lessons weren't that long ago. But with that being said, this has been the Quick History Lesson Podcast. Thank you once again for your support and for listening. Until next time.